Hello, everybody. Welcome to Blockchain Banter. Today, we have what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion. Is code really law, though? We're going to dig into this and kind of get a feel for what you guys are thinking, how you even interpret this. But before we dive in, I would love for my guests to introduce themselves. Glenn, you haven't been here in a minute. Why don't you start us off?
Yes, thank you for having me. Jen, also nice to meet Podchain here. I'm with Bancor on the BizDev side. Been with the project since 2020, but officially joined in early 2022. Prior to that, I was sort of working for a hedge fund out of NYC for about 6 years. So that's that's a little bit about my background. Made the switch over to a blockchain DeFi Web3 and been here since then. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Glenn. We'll go ahead and pass it over.
And pleasure to meet you as well, Glenn. My name is 21, and Jen, you already know. I am the marketing one of two marketing and growth leads for Blockchain. I also focus on collaborations, CEX listings, networking, things like that. And I've been with the project for about 2 years since its inception, 2023, January 16th. Got into DeFi about roughly 2020, 2021. Came from traditional finance, of course, stocks and things like that kind of caught my interest. And then when crypto became available on Robinhood, it was like, oh, what's this? Back in the ETH for $500 days. So it's been quite some time. I think I got a few trade histories screenshotted and framed to hang on my wall just for old time's sake, But yeah, I've been in the space for at least 5, 6, 7 years. DeFi, I got into through NFTs and just naturally fell in love with the tech and the blockchain application. So here we are now building for Blockchain and trying to connect the space as one.
It's always nice getting together with people who are really in it for the tech.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with like being here and not really knowing and understanding the tech. But that's also what really got me into this is I always say like I am the meme, in it for the tech and not just because sometimes I might make a bad trade or two. Like I'm really actually in it for the tech as well.
And it is really cool sometimes to say that, we came for the money, but we stayed for the tech and sometimes we even stayed for the people, I think that's really, really a cool thing to be able to say,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a couple weeks ago, Glenn, you weren't on this call with us, but we spoke about decentralization, and if people really care anymore if things are decentralized, and it was kind of a debate that we were having and we broke it down a little bit. And I think the core of it was this has always been, one of the main, the ethos of blockchain, one of them. And I think code is law kind of goes into that same category, right? First, I want to ask you guys, how do you even interpret code as law? It might seem like a silly question, but the more I look at different cases, the more I look at different things, the more I realize that I personally interpret it a few different ways. Do either one of you want to start us off and let me know what your thoughts are? Let our viewers as well.
Yeah, maybe 21. Maybe you go first.
Sure. So I interpret the code as law as basically what's in your code is how your blockchain is going to operate. And there's going to be less intermediaries and less people. I mean, for lack of a better phrase, people, humans messing around with it and things like that. You're going to basically be governed and regulated by the code, by what's in your code. To me, that's code as law. It's basically whatever is put into the code is going to be the law and the constraints and the restrictions and limitations of that blockchain or that system or that network or whatever it is you might be compiling or building and stuff like that. But in the crypto world, I definitely think it applies to the decentralization aspect. And I do. That's where I'm kind of on the fence about it because I'm fine with the code as law, but I believe that it's coming under an umbrella of trying to remove people from the equation. We have to remember it's still people who build the code. It's still people who program the code. So it's kind of to me, it's not counterproductive, but it's starting to create a conflict of interest. The more we want to remove people from the equation of decentralization and from the coding and everything else, we're gonna need people to oversee. I mean, we're not at a point in time, I don't think technologically to where we can absolutely rely on a fully automated system. I do maintenance for oil and gas in real life. So I'm actually a maintenance technician and instrumentation specialist. So that's my job is to implement new technology to older industries. and to just maintain them. So there's always going to be a need for people, no matter what you do, no matter what technology. So it's not counterproductive, but it does rise. It does raise kind of a small conflict of interest in ideals, rather, because I don't think it's fully explained properly in the beginning, and people think code is law, no more people. But I mean, we're going to have to find some kind of harmony and mixture to kind of work together to
A balance between them,
balance, which is kind of tricky because decentralization was meant to provide that purity of balance back into a system we no longer believe in. So we're kind of like, it's kind of, we have some work to do, definitely.
I have some questions for you, but I want to pass it over to Glenn first and see if he gets a different, feel from the actual claim itself.
Maybe I'll take the opposite view here.
Okay.
And I'm going to say, so there's a few things here, right? I'll probably go ahead and say that code is not the law, right? Like I think ideally, this is what people that work in blockchain and these decentralized systems, right? This is the stance that we want to have, right? Like we should be governed by the smart contracts and the code that we're writing, right? But I don't think this is actually something that most, I guess jurisdictions or most countries actually recognize, right? There is the real law, right? And that is essentially how things tend to work, right? You have laws that are in place by certain governments, and wherever you're residing, right, those things will apply to you, right? Regardless of, like the smart contract or these other things that you might have written, right? So this is where I think things get dicey, right? Because we have seen, I would say, a lot of these cases where people were like, oh, I just did XYZ because the smart contract allowed me to do that. But
we saw this with Mango, right? I think that was what he was saying with Mango.
We saw this with Mango, right? We saw someone literally pump up the value of some collateral, right? And then they were able to steal $100+ million from this lending and borrowing protocol, right? Well, the guy was like, it's like, this is like a profitable trading strategy, right? Like the smart contract allowed me to do this. Well, you know what? This guy is now, I believe he's in NYC in prison, right? Because this is clearly market manipulation, and you stole funds at the end of the day. So like, even though the smart contract allow you to do this, that does not mean that that was actually, under the law, right? That was something that was right to do, right? So this is where I think it gets kind of dicey because there is a real law. Unfortunately, I don't think the smart contract that you write, this has been acknowledged by governments to be the law. I'm pretty sure that's not the case. So this is where I'm saying like, okay, I think ideally for us, when we write something, we'd like for it to be this way, but unfortunately, the reality is that this is not how things are in the real world.
So it's more of a want than it is really actually a legitimate sort of stance at this point, right? Like we say code is law, but at the end of the day, there's a difference between blockchain law and like our industry law and the actual, legal system. And they vary, like Glenn said, depending on where you are. Okay, so then I have a question for you guys. When Glenn, I'll put this one on you because you're kind of taking this position, right? When does code is law actually have like ground to stand on then? When does that apply? Or do you think that it doesn't actually at all?
I think it's like I would say it's like a gray area, right? I would say even if you take the stance that the code is the law, right? At the end of the day, someone has to be writing that smart contract, right? And even for the person that's actually writing that smart contract, right? They might have a certain thing that they're expecting that smart contract to do, right? But we do know that, okay, like smart contracts, they do have bugs, right? And sometimes there's like unexpected behavior that tends to occur. So even at that point in time, like if you are like the group or the project behind it, you're like, well, this is doing something that wasn't expected. So, like it shouldn't actually work this way, right? Even though like you wrote it, there might have been a bug. Like clearly, like we all make mistakes, right? There's nothing that's 100% correct. So even then, I would say like what we write is not always, what we're expecting, right? Because these mistakes tend to happen, and some of these mistakes do tend to be quite costly in terms of funds that are lost. I would say. So like I think the ideal here is that okay, we want to write something, right? And we want to have this thing operate in a decentralized manner, right? Like on a blockchain that is sufficiently decentralized, right? Such that the smart contract can be utilized by anyone, right? There might be like a front end, but maybe like, okay, it's a smart contract. You don't need to access it via that front end, right? Anyone can use it for whatever purpose they want it to be. And whatever that code does is, whatever output it produces, that is what we're governed by, right? I think this is like the ideal scenario. But I think there's a couple of prerequisites in order for it to be that way, right? Like, for example, if that smart contract is, for example, immutable, okay, that's great. But a lot of smart contracts, they don't operate that way. Some of them are not immutable. They might have like a proxy contract that allows you to change things, upgrade over time, which there's also like pros and cons to this, by the way. And then obviously like, okay, well, if it's not immutable, it can change over time. So then does that mean that this code is actually law because it keeps changing?
Right.
So there's all these, like, I would say, nuances to this question, right? I think we should strive to have certain things, right? Like certain principles I think we should apply to, like these principles of decentralization, right? Non-custodial, right? And immutability. Like all these things are a great principle to actually strive to.
Okay, Glenn, really fast, because you grouped immutability in there, right?
Yeah.
If code is immutable, you can't go back in, you can't change it, you can't anything, right? So this
Correct.
is where you're saying that this is kind of when you can interpret code is law because of this, right? I mean, law,
Correct.
you can go back and you can change and addendums and things, but okay, so immutability.
Yeah,
What about when?
Yeah,
what
I
about
think
if something happens? I mean, we've seen some of these, vulnerabilities or exploits, or we see these flash warnings where it's like, okay, all the developers jump because are we using this code base because this was just exploited. Now, if you have that in your protocol or something of the sort, or your protocol is based on that, it's some sort of a foundational piece or it's integrated in there somewhere, then you're not able to go back in and do anything. You think that this should be one of like those core, what did you refer to them as, like those core beliefs in blockchain?
Yeah, I think all developers strive towards writing immutable code eventually, right? But I don't think they're there from the beginning, from day one. I think it's sort of like a progression. Like you tend to progress towards that, right? It's like also it's the same thing with decentralization. I think obviously we want to progress towards having a full decentralized system. But being fully decentralized is essentially it's a spectrum, right? Like, what do you consider fully decentralized, right? And obviously, like when you are quite new at something and you're just starting out, most of the time when you're just beginning, that's not going to be the case. It's something that you're always, improving over time, right?
Okay, so another question then: when a law is enforced, right? Generally, somebody is at fault. Someone is to blame, So if there's immutable code, right? And I'm not taking a stance on whether I think that code should be immutable or anything of the sort. I'm really just, So if something is immutable, code is immutable, and there's some sort of an exploiter, there's some sort of an attack, and developers, do you think that there is someone to blame here? Maybe the users, right? We know the risks, or we should, in using these new technologies, right? And is it us?
Paul, maybe 21, maybe you can chime in here. What do you
Yeah, it's
think?
open question.
No, yeah, that's a great one. As she's saying it, I'm over here, my mind's blown. I'm like, wow, it's an absolute great question. It's accountability, and it brings me back to the open source thing. We have this great technology. We had the 13-year-old kid who was able to get online, learn how to deploy a project on Pump Fund, and rug people for 30 grand. That's our fault. That is our fault. That is a developer. I take blame for that as well as every other. I'm not a dev, but that's our fault from this space. We gave that kid that power for free because we scream open source, right? But he was able to learn it off the same platforms that we use. He was able to learn that information and use it maliciously. That's our fault. So I there comes a great sense of responsibility with the power of the things that we're building, and we're talking monetary, values of market caps of trillions of dollars in crypto. So where do we start to kind of say, okay, we need to kind of take accountability for this? Because as we do put these codes, we put immutable contracts out there. We make it to where things can't be changed. Code is law. It's malicious. It happens. Now it's your fault because you didn't do resource. I mean, you didn't do your own research. But when you step into the space, the only thing you hear is DYOR. You don't hear
Right.
people teaching you how to use a scanner. You don't teach people using you or teaching. You don't have people teaching you about immutable contracts on
But
what.
when you talk, oh, go ahead. Sorry,
I
excuse
was
me.
just gonna say you don't have people teaching you the in-depth things that are really important. They say the things that'll get their ass out of trouble if they get in trouble. But if they get in trouble, they say do your own research as a disclaimer. Is we're not
Mhm.
actually teaching, we're just disclaiming to save our own selves. So I take full responsibility for that. And I'm kind of where, yeah, if code is law, then we have to be careful with that code. And I thought Glenn made a great point. It's not necessarily about the code, it's about the outcome. What is going to happen when that code reaches the public? Is it going to have a malicious effect? That should be the governing factor, right? You can code how you want to code. You can do your code as law, but if you're going to do something maliciously and it's going to take advantage of people once it's in operation, the outcome of the code, I think that should be the governing factor. And I think that was a really, really fantastic point to make as well.
Then it's kind of left in the hands of, somebody to make that decision, though. You know what I mean? And I think that can itself be interpreted in different ways. When you look at Tornado Cash,
It's tricky, I know. And
right? It
you're like,
wasn't meant to be anything malicious, but it
right.
was used and it was viewed, it was received as something by the authorities as something that was, or I mean, at least it was a threat enough to have come to what it did,
I'd love to
right?
get more as a standard from developers, from project builders, from people just like us that are having these discussions, that the more we talk about it, just kind of a standard, like, hey, if we're going to be open source with this, then let's make sure we either have a way to hold people accountable for whenever things do go wrong or things don't go, and I don't want to sound too harsh, like when things go wrong. Of course, there are bugs. You found the
Of
bug,
course.
things, but what I mean is like when people use things maliciously, we need a way to hold those people accountable. Right. If you're going
When
to
you're talking about the users, or are you talking about the developers?
not the users, not the users who are ignorant, or not ignorantly, but like unknowingly taken advantage of the user or the developer who actually put that malicious code out there, right? That
Okay.
some type of accountability for that. So say that
Mm.
they go into it as code is law, but then they somehow find a way to manipulate it. Well, then maybe, and I don't want to say maybe this is the chain or whatever, but whatever smart contract, wherever that contract was deployed, we need to start looking into them maybe a little bit more. And that could be a tool that could be built. That could be an AI thing. That could be something that could be implemented in the future. We could tie those two together and maybe have a filter to maybe go over this code as law before it's deployed as a safety mechanism. If we don't want to rely on the people doing it, there could be other ways that we could maybe, kind of filter it out and make sure the code is supposed to what it's going to be, and maybe a predictability of the outcome of what this code can produce once it is in use on the user's hands. Run a simulation. Have a simulation run. If you want to deploy on this blockchain, I need you to run this simulation so we can see exactly what the users are going to experience via your code. I would love that.
And if it's not immutable, then they can go in and create this sort of backdoor, this sort of something, though, too. So that comes back to what Glenn was saying
So
with the
those are
immutability,
right.
right?
Those
That
are
will
questions,
only take us so far. And I
but
think we're
that
talking
could be,
about, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that could be a simply label. Instead of telling people to do your own research, we should teach them about immutability and teach them, hey, this one is, this one isn't. Make your decision wisely, and then
Do you
kind of. go from there.
Do you guys honestly think there aren't enough resources for users who actually want to learn
Yes.
learn?
No, I don't
Because
think-
while we're talking about accountability, you, 21, are doing it as though builders and developers need to have more accountability,
Mhm.
right?
exactly.
What about the users?
Well, the users don't have much. All they have right now is DYOR. That's all they
Or
see.
they have ape.
Right.
If they come into
Exactly.
this space, right? Because otherwise, I think that we are scapegoats for their actions. And I will say that.
You're very right. Very true.
I think that a lot of people come in here and they see crypto and it's a get rich quick, and they see memes and they either get their FOMO and then they start buying into everything. If there's a 13-year-old kid that's launching a meme coin on pump.fun when 98.5 or 99.5% of them are rugging within the first,
Right.
I forget what it was, 16, 24 hours. I mean, I don't think there needs to be much research material available to know that. I mean, you have to be responsible at that point for your own actions. You're consciously making that decision to FOMO into this token, So
I'd love to see things other than hurry by now or DYOR. I'd love to see things like, hey, here's how to use a scanner, take it a step further, just take it maybe like a notch up besides from disclaimers to cover our own butts. You know what I mean? 'Cause that's basically what they are. Like, we tell people, do your own research. This is not financial advice. It's basically on you at this point. But then they're still stuck. They're like, well, what the hell does DYOR mean? So I would love to see developers, founders, even users kind of unite on a front to educate, and I'm not saying run long 8-hour long classes, but if people have questions, let's answer them and let's say things. Let's have a follow up. DYOR is a buzzword. Instead of saying that, let's say, let me teach you how to use your scanner, friend. Let me teach you how to use GitHub, friend. Let me teach you how to use an audit company, the way you can run a contract through an audit and see what kind of audits they have. I mean, something simple like that outside of, hey, DYOR, we're done here. You know what I mean?
I understand that. And this is why Mark always comes back to, is this really a trustless system? At the end of the day, you're trusting someone unless everyone knows everything. And I think here's the thing too. Builders aren't here. I mean, they're here to build, but are they here to hold hands and to educate everybody on how to do all of these things themselves?
Very true.
Now you're taking on an entirely new career, right?
Yeah.
You're now a professor and a teacher in addition to an actual developer that's here to build a protocol something of this sort.
We hit that like a brick wall, having a new technology and a new way for builders to build. That has been one of the biggest hurdles for myself as marketing and growth to overcome. So that's why I'm kind of passionate about the whole education thing. We have to redefine this space as a whole. And that's I'll die on the hill screaming that message. This space needs a definite redefinition of technological technological meanings as opposed to buzzwords and KOL opinions.
Yeah. Glenn, we haven't heard from you. I want to know if you have any thoughts here and want to chime in.
Yeah, I think intent is it's very important in here, right? Obviously, like if you're doing something with malicious intent, if you're creating a smart contract that's going to drain someone's account, right? If they interact with it, things of this nature. Obviously, I think that should have its repercussions. Right. There's people that do things with malicious intent. There's people that are doing things non-maliciously, right? But let's just say they had a bug and the thing just failed, right? That is a failure, right? Doesn't mean that there was any fraud in that, right? And I think this is just part of being testing out new technology that's brand new
early in an industry.
Early in an industry, this thing is going to happen, right? And obviously, like there's a lot of failures that have occurred in this industry with different protocols, and I don't look at that as like, okay, this should be this person is responsible. Of course not, right? Like this is like a clear failure, right? It wasn't this intent from the beginning, right? And I think it's good for us to recognize, right, when something is clearly a fraud versus something just failing, right?
And when there's no clear winner at the end of the day,
right?
You can't call it any sort of a malicious intent, right? And
right.
With Mango, there was a clear winner.
Right. With Mango, there was like a clear winner. right? When that happens, right? And
Right.
you'll find other cases, I think, where protocols have failed, right? And obviously, it wasn't with like a with this mindset of okay, we're gonna try to defraud people, right? No, it was
There's
just
a difference between
yeah,
the rugging,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a clear difference between a rug and a blatant scam.
right,
And there is those that are really looking to
correct,
build and advance and
and then
grow this industry.
right, and in the case of like a failure, I'm sure that the person that wrote that they would have been like, oh crap, you know what? Maybe I didn't want code to be law in this case. Like, I clearly made a mistake there. There might have been like a certain case that I did not account for, and I just had incorrect output, right? So, how do we prevent that? It's okay. Well, obviously, like, is there some fault on the developer side? Is it some fault on the user side? Right? I think obviously multiple parties. I don't think anyone is at fault per se, right? Like, think if you're a project that have done like, okay, you've done your audits, great. Maybe you've done a formal verification. You've taken it a step further, right? If you're a user, right, of that project, maybe you've read the actual documentation, right? Sometimes things happen just like in real life, like outside of like blockchains and smart contracts, sometimes things tend to happen, and you have to be prepared for those scenarios, right? Perhaps maybe not putting all your funds into this one thing, right? Doing some risk management. This is all something that you at the user side should be doing, right? On the developer side, obviously by now, I hope that everyone is doing audits on smart contracts they're deploying, right? They're testing them on test nets, giving them some like burn-in period before they go live. Maybe they don't take large amounts of deposits on day one. And these are just things that you do. And then obviously, as you feel comfortable that this thing is working as expected, you start removing some of the training wheels, right? You remove some of those limitations, maybe deposit limitations. You eventually start to make that code immutable after it has been live for X amount of months or years.
Tried and tested.
Yeah, and then this is like at the end of the day, okay, now you feel comfortable. Okay, then it's okay. This code is on the blockchain. It's immutable. We cannot touch it anymore. It's been tested by multiple different people, and I think okay, now we trust this, right? And I think this has been with like a lot of different code bases, right? They've been out there for a while. They've been operating without any issues, and it's like okay, we have a high sense of trust in this code, and whatever input we give, it's gonna produce the output that we expect, right?
Let me go ahead, Glenn. Sorry.
No, I think that's pretty much my closing thoughts there about
Yeah. I want to shift it though,
Mhm.
because we're talking about code as law
Mhm.
and malicious intent as developers and builders.
Mhm.
What about as users, right? You have this protocol, you have these smart contracts that are tried and tested, and you put this out there and it's there. We talked about it with Mango. We see some cases now, and I don't think that it'll be the last, or where there are users. We say code as law is open to interpretation, but there are certain laws that aren't. Theft, things of this sort, right? So when a law is broken, how far does code as law take us before we actually interfere? Because I think there's a moral sort of play in this, right? I mean, if somebody is using your protocol as you intended, they're not harming you, they're not harming your protocol, it's not affecting your users' funds, but it is being used illicitly. Then what? Is code still law, or do you interfere? If it's not immutable, of course, It's up to the project. I mean, there's no real set standard in our industry, right? And I think this is why it kind of is so difficult to say code is law, period.
I think the blurriness with decentralization has a lot to do with that as well too. I don't believe that stopping someone from being scammed on your blockchain is non-decentralized. If you're a project, if you know, I work for a project. If we can stop someone from being scammed, and I'm not talking about rolling the blockchain back, but if we can find, some type of way to provide accountability and help them, I'm for it. And they'll say that, and I know the community will say, "Oh, that's not decentralized. That's people running." Well, decentralization, as we talked about before, prior, goes with your tokenomics, not how you keep people safe with your product. And that's something I firmly believe in. And that comes back to the education of the space. We need to educate people on what decentralization really is, and that it's okay to have someone protecting you on your. And I'm not saying that don't have your DAO and leave you leave the control of your project up to 3 people. But yes, definitely have a way to provide accountability if something like that does happen, because what's going to happen is, Glenn made the great point earlier. It's all about the outcome. Eventually, the code of law is going to conflict with the real laws in the real world. How are we ever going to get the mass adoption if we can't even find a middle ground there?
Well, let's bring it back to tornado, right? You've got hackers, you've got whatever, drug lords, whatever you want to call it, that are washing their funds and things through Tornado Cash, right? And I think this is where they took a lot of heat from this. Do you step in, or do you step back and say code is law and they're just using this as intended? Not as intended, but not doing anything malicious in the sense that this is what this was for, but knowing who is on the other end.
Let me ask you this. So do we wait until we find out that it's a cocaine dealer that's washing money? Or if, like, say, for instance, in an example, an individual has not broken any laws, they just simply use Tornado Cash to move money. Fine. But they didn't break any financial laws or any code is law laws or any SEC laws as far as moving the money. Are we supposed to step in? And I get the question, say it's a cocaine lord from some country. At what point do we say, because we're blockchain developers, we're in the finance, monetary, we're not world peace. So I think that's maybe where we draw the line. I'm not sure. Is that too loosely? I feel like that might be too loosely said. I don't know. I feel bad saying that, but we're here for the monetary side of it. Like the regulation of the monetary side of it, where they get the money. If it shouldn't matter if it's a cow farmer or a cocaine dealer. Of course, if it's Pablo Escobar and they're on the national news and they're using Tornado Cash and they're publicly tweeting about it, then maybe you might want to step in for PR references. But I don't know. It's conflicting. It's a really great question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to feel about it or where we step in. I mean, they're not breaking any SEC laws or financial laws. Then like as Glenn said, they're not the laws of the actual laws. The land is not being broken. So we're at what point, do we say, okay, well, I feel like we'd be overpowering our justice system by saying, okay, you're not doing anything. Let us take it up a notch and we'll go after him because we know where the money's coming from. So does that cause more chaos or does that?
That's interesting. That's interesting that you bring that up. If the actual authorities aren't going after them, if it's that obvious,
do we just collaborate with them, or do we say, hey, look, is this what you need? The evidence? I mean, like, how does it go? I mean, I'm not saying go after everybody, but if make it definitely open and make it a joint effort. If they want to work with us and they need the information we have, cool, open it up to them. Let them do it, and I hate to be like that, but that's the way it is, and I mean, I feel like a collaboration would be a better effort as opposed to one way or the other, maybe.
Glenn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think decentralization matters a lot, like 21 was saying, when it comes to this, right? So in the case of someone using your protocol in a nefarious manner, doing something that is like illegal, right? I think so. So there's like a few things, right? Let's say you are like a liquidity provider, that protocol, and they're using, the liquidity that you've provided to perform like a swap. Well, maybe you might decide, like, as an individual, I morally do not agree with what's going on and how my funds are used. I'm going to withdraw my liquidity, right? That is up to you. And you might take into consideration that, okay, perhaps, you know what, under where I reside, my jurisdiction, I might get into trouble because of this, right? Especially, let's say, the government where I am, the government where I'm residing in, right, might have said something along the lines of, if you have interacted with these addresses, right, they are now on some like OFAC sanction list, right?
Right.
Well, all of a sudden, because you've interacted with those addresses, you might be in trouble if you ever interact with like a centralized exchange or something like this. So you might decide, okay, I'm going to withdraw my liquidity. Now, how about on the project side? Let's say you're the protocol. Maybe you're hosting a front end for this, right? Obviously, the smart contract is deployed on chain. Anyone can interact with it on chain directly, but most people tend to interact with the front end. That front end and that project or protocol, they also have some jurisdiction that they operate under, right? And they might decide, you know what, these addresses that are using my protocol, they are tainted. You know what, I'm going to rely on maybe like a TRM or one of these type of services, right? Which a lot of now front ends, they do rely on, right? And I'm not going to let this individual use my front end anymore, right? Or I might decide to block this address because I know that the individual has been identified as someone that maybe stole funds from a sex or something like this, right? That is like something else that you can do. In the case of Tornado Cash, what we also saw was we actually saw block builders that they said, you know what, if I see a block with transactions from this like OFAC sanction list, I'm not going to include those in my block, right?
Yeah.
So these are like block builders, that made this decision, right? Obviously, I'm sure these like block builders, they are also taking into account, you know what, I'm maybe like operating in like a highly regulated area in the US, right? I have an entity that I have a business under, right? I'm not going to get, I don't want to put this, pressure on me. Should I get in some legal trouble because I'm building blocks that have transactions from these like OFAC sanction lists, right? So there's like multiple ways that people can sort of try to, I would say, try to cooperate in their best possible manner, right? At the end of the day, if someone wants to use a smart contract outside of the front end, they certainly can. It's going to be a lot more difficult. And then obviously, there's also the case that transaction might not get included if, let's say, the majority of block builders are now censoring transactions from the censoring address, right? There might have been a few of them that didn't care because they might have been block builders in other countries where this doesn't matter. So this is where like that decentralization aspect come into play, right? Like if you have block builders all across the world, well, the ones that are like operating in the countries where, okay, they've told you like this is not, this is illegal to do now, right? Maybe they'll stop, right? But then there's others that have operating outside of that jurisdiction, and to them, they're not breaking the law at that point in time. So it's like, I think it's, there's different areas that you can look at. Decentralization plays a large role in this, I would say, right? And obviously, I think that is like a key factor when it comes to it.
Yeah.
I think that's great points too. Glenn also pointed out there's a lot of variables when we're talking about this, and we mentioned accountability quite a bit. I think he made a great point. It's going to be a little bit on everyone's shoulders to do. It's not going to be, there's not one side of us. We have users, developers, and we have the malicious people who are looking to attack. We have other people who are just kind of standby watching. It's not going to be an entity that's going to save us all. It's going to be a little bit of work from everyone to make the space. And that's the point I was trying to touch on earlier, but I think you did it a little bit better. Is it's definitely going to be a unified effort from, users are going to have to do a little bit more research. Developers will have to be a little bit more, not transparent, but a little bit, work a little bit more together with people and it might be regulators, so I really think that was a great point. It's going to be a unified effort to make the space great again.
And yeah, I think because we are such like nascent, there isn't quite as many regulations when it comes to our industry. To a certain extent, I do think we have to like police ourselves, right? We as a community should be trying to police ourselves and calling out stuff when we see that it's not correct, right?
Do you guys see that happening now?
Yeah, because we're 5%, and what do they say all the time? Well, there's 5% of us. Like Glenn said, we need to set the standards. There's only 5% of us, 7% of us in the world. We're very, very, very early. So, like you said, we need to set those standards and teach people how to build, because it was the Wild West. What, 2021? There wasn't really a standard, but now people are starting to work together. We're realizing we have power in numbers. There's benefits to working together, regardless of chains, projects. So none of that should matter. It's all blockchain. We're all family. You know what I mean? So I like that point. I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah, if we don't do it, then someone else is going to do it for us. And if someone else does it for us, I think we're not going to be in a good spot, I think. So we should definitely be trying to police ourselves as much as we can, and trying to do, I think, what is right as much as possible.
And that will get us a better conversation for mass adoption too, because I'm not going to lie to you. We use mass adoption a lot, but we have to be honest. As a Fortune 500 company, if we were to even just sit down in our office desk one day and look at crypto Twitter, would you want to go invest in right? I mean, it's a serious question. Like, the more we work together and the more we collaborate and actually make our sales brochure a little bit better, like, hey, this is our space. We're building blockchain. We're not 90,000 different, because right now, for mass adoption, for them to accept the payment, they've got to put together a think tank, which is going to run them millions of dollars to digest what blockchain they think their customers are going to be on, what cryptocurrency they think their customers are going to be. That's a lot of freaking research for a Fortune 500 company to do, to only accept 5% of the world's payments. It doesn't make sense for them in any kind of way. So the more we collaborate and make this space a little bit more transparent together, and we're not arguing all the time, we're actually working together, I think that'll get us a lot better chair at that table and let us have a greater conversation, more pleasant conversation whenever that time does in fact come,
Okay, so speaking of mass adoption then, do you think something like code is law would scare off people from actually getting into this industry? For some, it's appealing, but when we're talking about something being exploited, and do we step in or don't we step in, and it's kind of up to different individuals to do that depending on their jurisdiction, Glenn. At that point, something happens, your bank is robbed, that money is insured, right? You're not suddenly out of your money. There's somebody, whoever, the money printer, I don't know, whoever it happens to be, where you're going to have that money back. Something happens to a protocol or something of the sort, and we say code is law. Now,
and it also takes you down the AI road, though. There's a lot of trust. AI is buzzing right now. There's a lot of artificial intelligence embracement, especially in the eastern side of the world. The western, I'm from the west. We're slow as always. We're catching up slowly but surely, but we are getting there. So yeah, there's already an acceptance and an interest in artificial intelligence. So code is law. I'm not going to say it's AI, but it's to me, it follows along the same principles. I don't know if you'd agree or not, but I think it might actually have some interest more than what we think. It just depends, really.
Glenn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think as a user, sometimes, I've seen for and against it. Like, sometimes I think users were like, okay, let's say, that code was not immutable, right? And all of a sudden the devs could actually go in there, they can upgrade the contract, and then they can save the funds. And everyone's happy. Yay, my funds were saved. But I've also seen the same thing in the opposite scenario where, like, oh crap, actually, you know what? The devs actually lost the admin keys for whatever reason.
This was supposed to be decentralized.
And all of a sudden, you know what? They changed the smart contract and the funds are gone, right? It's like, now you're angry, right? Because this happened. So it's, you know what? I think it matters on a case-by-case basis. Situations are different. But I think generally, I do think, obviously, striving towards immutability, I think it's generally like a good mindset to have after you sort of burn in the thing for like a period of time, right? From a user perspective, I think you might, I'm already seeing this. I think like I'm seeing like more curated type of blockchains, or like, for example, what's that? What's the Pudgy Penguin blockchain that they launched recently? I forgot what it was called, but
I don't
they have
recall.
they have similar to like an app store type of thing, where they're going towards like that model, where it's like, okay, we have like these decentralized applications, which we are quite comfortable in actually putting out there to our users.
Abstract.
Right. So this is somewhat similar to, like, I guess, Apple in the real world, right? Or outside of Web3, I should say. Apple outside of Web3, they have tight controls into like which apps actually can be installed on their devices. They go through an actual, like, okay, you have to write to a certain standard, right? Your apps must have these things in it. If it does these other things, we're not going to allow it, right? And the users can still choose to install those apps that are not allowed, but it's quite the process to do so. Like, you might even have to like jailbreak your phone in order to install those apps, right? And then obviously most people are discouraged from doing that anyway. So like that might be like a certain direction that the industry might take over time, right? Where there's certain smart contracts that everyone knows are safe. They've been battle tested, and these are the ones that we have a lot of certainty that you interact with them. There's not gonna happen, like, nothing's gonna happen to your funds.
They've been battle tested.
Yeah, and then there's other smart contracts that have been recently released, or we might not even know like what these are for. Like, you interact with these things at your own risk. Right.
Let me ask you guys a question, and this isn't, and I honest answers. Okay. Because I will be completely honest. When when Carbon DeFi first launched, right? When it first went live, Glenn, did you have more people asking you about audits or about rewards?
Probably rewards, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think that there's a little bit, we talk about an imbalance. Do you think maybe there's a little bit of an imbalance, especially when we're talking about intentions and things like that, when it comes to developers creating these protocols, what their intentions are, but like the actual, this kind of comes back to education and things, right? I've been screaming that Carbon DeFi was, it wasn't just audited once, audited 3, 4, 5 times. Yeah. No one cares. I don't understand it, right? It's like, it's the thing that they least care about.
Yes.
But the thing that they're loudest about, if anything were to ever happen with the protocol. I think that's kind of where that disconnect comes in. I think it's between the actual users and the builders, the developers, and it's intentions, but it's also expectations in an odd way. And I think that's where it comes in. What I was saying earlier is, is it just, you're saying it's a case by case thing, but maybe it's a convenience thing at the end of the day for whoever's making that claim that code is law. I do have one question here. It's a little bit, we were talking earlier about users and funds and washing funds and things of the sort. Blue Hawk is asking, KYC. What do you guys think about KYC? When we're talking about, how we don't want to be the Wild West, and we really can't be the Wild West. We need some sort of regulation in order to, like you were saying, 21, reach that mass adoption. We have a few minutes left. What do you guys think about KYC?
I love KYC. PrimalGlenn has a gold KYC badge from Certic. We also have Skynet monitoring on our blockchain 24 hours a day, 365. I'm doxed myself. 10 core team members are KYC gold badged through Certic. We have a multi-sig wallet where 8 of those members I think it's 6 out of 8 members have to sign off on any transaction whatsoever coming from our treasury. I love KYC. The reason being, it takes the whole trust me, bro, out of the equation. I'm sorry, but Walmart's not going to dump $100 billion into someone who wears a mask in their PFP. They want to sit down with people, and they don't want to talk to Twitter accounts. They want to talk to business people, to builders, to people who actually want to do something with blockchain technology. So when it comes to talking about building and developing and actually talking real mass adoption, data application, internet type things, yes, KYC, I'm all for it because we have nothing to hide. There's absolutely nothing to hide. So
What about safety and security?
of who?
Well, we've seen ransoms.
I'm yeah, true, yeah, true. See that? Then I would say hire. It's a nature of the beast. So whenever
there's also third parties though, right? Like we have.
But whenever
we
you're
have third parties where
an
you
NBA
can be verified by them. You're not doxxed, but you are verified by a third party who will say, you know what, we have verified. They are who they say they are.
And that's,
we have their ID. We have their location. We have their social. I don't know if it's socials everywhere else in the world, right? But I do remember having a previous blockchain banter where there are things because of the safety and security aspect. Glenn, really fast, I'm going to pass it over to you. 21, I'm going to come back to you. I don't want to run out of time before we get to hear Glenn's take.
Yeah, same thing. I think depending who you are, you might have certain requirements. And obviously those requirements might be, I have to know who is interacting with me, or I might only allow certain people to interact with my contract if I know who they are. And I think these two things can live together, right? You're going to have contracts from certain parties that have the requirements, right? And then you're going to have contracts that might not have the requirement. They'll just let anyone interact with, right? And protocols might take both stance here, right? I know Aave, for example, they have like an institutional offering, right? And they just have regular Aave, right? So it's like, okay, like you can interact with the institutional offering, right? Obviously, if you're doing that, we do need to have you go through this, procedure to KYC yourself, right? And then you can use that offering, right? And then I think the people that are, providing whatever funds there as collateral, they do so knowing that the people that are borrowing have been people that are vetted, right? So I think it's I don't see anything wrong with it. Obviously, like you might have that requirement, and by all means, if that's something that you have to comply by, then there's nothing, there's no way around it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys are awesome. It's just about the top of the hour. Thank you so much for joining me. I was really the more. And there's obviously discussions and debates happening, and I'm reading through and I'm thinking, what do I actually like? What's my take on this?
It's hard to form one. It really is. There's so many variables.
Well, you try not to fall into these certain sorts of things, right? Like, I fell into all of this hard when I first got it. And I tell everybody, I mean, when I really got into crypto was the first time I saw the "it's happening tonight" meme. And that was it. All of a sudden, my whole, everything went into crypto because what's happening tonight, I don't want to miss it. And so now I'm a little bit more cautious when I hear certain things, Thank you again so much for joining me. Glenn, it was a pleasure to have you.
It was.
I'm glad that you were able to join. I hope that you are able to join us again soon.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. And great
21, always a pleasure.
Yes, likewise. I'll give you a follow on Twitter for sure.
Yeah, you know what? To all of our viewers, give the guys a follow. If you're not following me, give me a follow. PodChain, Bancor, Carbon DeFi. And Blue Hawk, thank you for your comment and your question. I appreciate you joining the last two calls, actually. Awesome. Well, everybody, don't reach out if you have any questions. If you want to hear any of these discussions, a specific topic discussed and you want to join us, don't be shy. Enjoy the rest of your week, guys. I will see you both, maybe open invitation for next week as well.
Oh, count me in. We're here.
Awesome. Cool. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, guys.
Bye now.
See ya.
Thanks again, Jen.
Of course.